send it back to you. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Jonny Bowden. He has his master's degree in psychology and counseling and a PhD in nutrition. He has earned 6 national certifications in personal training and exercise. He's board certified by the American College of Nutrition. He has written so many books that we'd have to spend half of this webinar being able to share with you the wonderful books that he has written. But one that we have gotten a lot of response to in addition to is The Great Cholesterol Myth. He's a regular contributor to magazines like Better Nutrition, Total Health, and Clean Eating. He's been on the Dr. Oz show. He is one of the most knowledgeable individuals I have ever met in the field of preventative and therapeutic nutrition. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jonny Bowden. Welcome, Jonny.
Hi, Cheryl, and hi, Jennifer, and hi, everybody who's on this call, and thanks for being here with us. I'm probably going to divert a little bit from the script just a minute, as I have been known to do in the past. I'll tell you a little backstage stuff. Personally, I go to webinars, and I find them incredibly boring most of the time. And there's been I also go to a lot of marketing seminars and a lot of stuff about, health entrepreneurs like myself and Terry and all these people in the space who are reaching out to wonderful audiences like you, and how can we reach them, and what are they interested in, and, what's their attention span, and YouTube's got all these new algorithms for, how long people stay on. And what we're hearing more and more is that people would really like the 15-second elevator speech. They really don't want to spend an hour on an interview to learn every little detail of someone's philosophy. They don't really want to get into the nitty-gritty of what cytokines are produced by what. They really just want to know the basic stuff that they need to know. So we're gonna go over a lot of details on this webinar, but before we even start, if I had you as a live audience, I'd probably say to you, how many know what inflammation is? How many really know what it is? You could get up here and give a 15-second speech on it. And probably, even though you're a very well-educated audience and you read a lot about this, probably not a lot of volunteers to come up and give the good 15-second elevator speech about what inflammation is and why the heck we give a darn. Why do we even care about it? Why even talking about it? Why did you take an hour of your valuable time out of the day to learn about this subject? What does it matter? So I would like, for those of you who might check out early or might have a limited attention span or just want to get to, before we even start with slide number 1, I want to tell you what I want you to leave here knowing about inflammation. And my challenge is to tell it to you in about a minute. So here's the deal. Inflammation is part of every disease. Every disease that you care about. Let's go through them. Alzheimer's, obesity, diabetes, cancer, some of the quote-unquote lesser ones that aren't necessarily life-threatening, like asthma. What's asthma except inflammation of the airway passages, right? Acne. What's acne except inflammation of the skin? So inflammation's part of every disease. That's point number 1. Point number 2, it comes in 2 flavors, and the one we care about is the one we know the least about. So anybody who's ever had a stubbed toe or a sore back or an abscess in the tooth, you know what that is. It's called acute inflammation. We're going to go over this in more detail, but again, I want to give this to you in 1 minute, a take-home. So that's acute inflammation. It hurts like hell. It doesn't really do much serious long-term damage. Chronic inflammation, the mirror opposite. It doesn't hurt at all. You don't even know that you have it, and it kills. That's what we're going to be talking about. That's why we care about inflammation. Inflammation is kind of, I think I have a slide later on today that Time magazine back in the 80s, they were prescient in realizing this, and they put inflammation on the cover and they said the silent killer. Well, it is a silent killer, and it is also one that doesn't get a lot of press. And the reason that we are interested in as health professionals and as patients is because it is part and parcel of every single disease that we have. And probably if we had one single health goal, if we had to pick one health goal, one physical health goal above all others, it would be to lower inflammation. That's how important it is. So if you learn nothing else, know that inflammation isn't some abstract concept. It's something that it means basically a good mnemonic device for inflammation, injury. So anytime you have an injury, and when it happens to the organs, to the brain, to the vascular system, this is when the mischief starts, and this is when disease really gets promoted. So that's what the subject of this webinar is. Now, here's and some of the things I just talked about, you're going to just see on slides, but maybe now they'll be reviewed because you will have heard them already in the first 2 minutes of this. And again, if you leave this minute know that inflammation is at the center of every one of these diseases. And as you can see from this chart, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular, Alzheimer's, pulmonary diseases, you name it, it's got an inflammatory component, and that's why we care. So I first got interested, I've been interested in this all along, but it's not like a really hot topic, a real sexy topic. You go, oh, you know, well, I don't know, I want to study something like, I don't know, let's go and study inflammation. That sounds good. No, it doesn't really, and you don't really think about these things very much until you think about a subject you are interested in, and then you see the role of something like inflammation. In my case, it was around 2008 I wrote a book on aging. And I wrote a book called The Most Effective Ways to Live Longer, which is something that all of us have a kind of vested interest in. I certainly do. I'm in my 60s. I'd like to be here another 20, 30 years easily in good health, so I was interested. What ages us? How come half the people I see who are 10 years younger than me look like my father? What exactly is going on? So I looked at, you know, there's a vast amount of literature on aging. A lot of studies, the Nun study, a lot of these studies that have actually followed people for decades and decades and decades and saying, you know, which ones get Alzheimer's? What did they do early on that protected them? Is there any correlation between what they did early in life and what happens later on? And, you know, what's the nature of cognitive, you know, impairment? And why does this guy on the left look so wrinkled with those big things under his eyes? And, you know, what is it that makes some people look like Suzanne Summers? And I know that there's plastic surgery and hormones and all that other stuff, but basically we've all seen extremely healthy people who haven't necessarily been plastic surgery assisted, who just look vibrant and wonderful and incredible in their 70s and 80s. I used to see these guys on the farm when we used to take family vacations, and I remember Papa. He was, you know, he was the granddad at this family vacation we used to go in his 80s on the diving board, and the guy had muscles. I mean, you know, so we've all seen people like that, and we've seen people certainly who don't look like that. So it got me wondering exactly what are the processes by which we age. And what I came up with was a concept. I called it the 4 horsemen of aging. There you can see them right there from left to right. There's the black horse, the red horse, and I just thought this was kind of a good metaphor. And the 4 horsemen, we're obviously not going to talk about all of them today, were kind of systemic things, whether one of them was something you eat, one of them was something you feel, 2 of them was something that happened in the body. But these 4 horsemen kind of did their damage systemically. And I always liken them to the Pashtun tribes of Pakistan. They don't know national border, you know, boundaries. They don't, you know, oh, this is Iraq, we can't cross the border. No, they live in the mountains. They go wherever they feel like it. And these 4 processes damage our body in the same way. They're not specific to the heart or specific to the brain or specific to any organ. They kind of go around doing their damage everywhere. And one of those 4 horsemen, maybe even the most important of them, although I think that they all play an enormous role in aging us and in promoting disease. One of the most important of those horsemen of aging is, of course, inflammation. So I mentioned earlier that there's really 2 flavors of inflammation. Here's acute inflammation. We all know what that looks like. It's redness and heat and sore, and you know, if you get a splinter, the area gets swollen, all of that stuff. And then there is, of course, the other one, which is chronic inflammation. Now, the only thing I want you to know here, don't get sidetracked with the technical stuff about pro-inflammatory cytokines and just look at the end result. Acute inflammation has an end. You get a toothache, it ends. You get a sore back, or you know, you twist something, it has an end point. The difference with chronic inflammation is it's on all the time. It doesn't have an end point. It is endless. And therein lies the real problem. So here's where, again, you can see inflammation, chronic inflammation that goes on all the time. It just promotes every single one of these diseases. So what exactly happens? You know, when we talk about, I gave that example about getting a splinter and about the area getting kind of flooded with, you know, gets swollen. Well, why does it get swollen? It gets swollen because your body's immune system is basically going, uh-oh, we've been invaded. Let's mount an attack. So you have white blood cells going to the area. They try to surround the puncture wound. They try to prevent a microbe from getting a hold and from an infection from getting started. So inflammation, when you think about it, is your body's natural response to an injury. You want to be able to have inflammation, just like you want to be able to have a temperature when you're sick. Your body's trying to cook all of those little microbes and get them out of there. It is a response that has to do with healing. It's very important that we are able to make inflammatory compounds, and those inflammatory compounds, by the way, if you want to go back to the technical stuff, are called cytokines. And there are pro-inflammatory ones and anti-inflammatory ones. So we want to be able to do that. So we have kind of like, and I'm going to tease a concept that's going to come up a little bit later on. We want to be able to produce an inflammatory army in our body so that we can heal or fight against injury, infection, foreign matter, any of the things that get into the body that aren't supposed to be there. So we need to be able to make inflammatory compounds. However, we also need to be able to make anti-inflammatory compounds. So it's kind of like, if you think of it, you've got these two, you've got the Army and the Navy. You've got these two armies. They must be funded equally. You can't just have lots of really good fighters in the inflammatory army and nothing to shut them off. And you can't just have great anti-inflammatory defenses and nothing to use in the case of when you need to heal, like when that splinter comes along. So we need both anti-inflammatory and inflammatory compounds in our body, and keep that in mind when we talk about how we get these compounds in. So how does this all have to do with fat? It actually has a lot to do with fat, because fat cells, back in the olden days, when people like me were getting educated, we thought fat cells were just annoying little sponges that sat on your stomach and your butt and your hips and your thighs, and they annoyed the hell out of you, and they made it impossible to close your jeans, but they were just annoying. We now know that they're very far from just annoying. They're certainly annoying, and they certainly piss everybody off and make everybody, run to diet doctors, but they do a lot more than just sit there and annoy you and make it difficult to close your 7 for mankind. What they do is they are basically little factories that put out hormones and cytokines and all of these different compounds. They manufacture estrogen, they manufacture inflammatory compounds. So the fatter you get, the more inflammation you have, and that's one of the reasons why inflammation is so connected to obesity. Because your little fat cells that are sitting there annoying you are also churning out more and more inflammatory compounds, which create more inflammation, which just start a very bad cycle. This is one of my favorite quotes from one of my first mentors, Barry Sears, the author of the Zone books. He said, "Acute inflammation hurts, chronic inflammation kills." This is just yet another slide that shows the same thing we've been talking about. There's that 1980s cover of Time magazine. Understanding the link between inflammation and the origins of the most chronic diseases in the world is growing in the mainstream medical world, though natural medicine experts have long understood this connection. Absolutely true. Here's just a little bit more of stuff in which you can see the relationship of inflammation to all of these diseases that we don't want to have. So now the question is, okay, we've got this terrible thing, chronic inflammation. Most of us don't even know when we have it. It flies beneath the pain radar. It just happens in our vascular system and in our organs and all these places, and but we don't even know that it's going on. Where's it coming from? Where is it coming from? Well, let's start with our air. Okay, what do you think happens when we breathe all that stuff in? The body freaks out. The liver freaks out. Everybody's going, they're calling cold blue. Then you've got polluted water. You've got medications. They may do wonderful things like knock out, polio and all the wonderful things that medications can do. But guess what? From the point of view of your poor liver, this is a foreign object that does not belong. It's a toxic object in many cases. It may be toxic to certain cells and not to others, but the point is it's definitely something that isn't in the natural human diet, and it is perceived as an invader, and it is perceived as something that is often precipitates an inflammatory response. Okay, now let's get into some of this is actually one of the other 4 horsemen of aging, but we're going to talk about it purely in terms of its impact on inflammation now, not just in terms of aging, and that is sugar. And this little white innocuous substance, which is, we like to say is the new heroin or the new cigarette smoking, is in everything. We consume massive amounts of it, which show no sign of abating. That's just a nice little visual to show you how much of those sugar cubes is in each serving of Coca-Cola. And it is not just sugar, by the way. It is foods or food products that convert to sugar in a heartbeat, and that includes your donuts and your pastries and God knows just about every cereal that's ever been made, despite completely idiotic information from conventional health authorities, about how we need cereal for fiber and all of that stuff. It's all bogus nonsense. So all of these foods, they convert to sugar in a heartbeat: pasta, potatoes, rice, donuts, cakes, breads, all of them. So we might as well think of them as sugar. Now, here's an interesting study about sugar and inflammation. I call it the Cornflakes Study. The actual name is The Acute Effect of Various Glycemic Index Dietary Carbohydrates on Endothelial Function in Non-Diabetic Overweight and Obese Subjects. Can you understand why researchers aren't the life of the party? That's how they talk. So my job is to translate that, and I call this the Cornflakes Study. So what they basically wanted to find out was how much high sugar foods, or foods that convert to sugar quickly or turn into sugar in the bloodstream quickly, how do they impact the arteries? How do they impact the functioning of those tubes that carry blood through your entire body? And so what they did was they basically fed people either water, pure sugar, or cornflakes for breakfast. And what they found, and then they measured arterial stress using a particular measure on the brachial artery to see, different things that they see to find out how much stress is actually being created in the vascular system. And guess what? Huge amounts of arterial stress, not in the water, but in both sugar and in the cornflakes group, almost the same amount. So sugar is extremely inflammatory. Extremely inflammatory. And here's a quote from Alex Vasquez from the textbook of functional medicine. He says, the standard American diet, commonly referred to as SAD, standard American diet, SAD, is inherently pro-inflammatory due to its excess of sugars and, what we're about to get to, its insufficiency of omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, so let's talk about that. And by the way, must reading, Wheat Belly, if you want to really get into, the inflammatory response and our current diet and what causes it and what the repercussions are and what the of this kind of eating, you really must read Wheat Belly by Bill Davis. And I would add to that, I think I didn't put that slide up because the book hadn't come out yet, Grain Brain by Dave Perlmutter. Really must read books to understand this fully. So let's go back to this thing that Alice Bax said about not enough omega-3s. So there's really actually a two-part process here. It's not just that we don't get enough omega-3s, it's also that we get far too many omega-6s. Now, these are new terms. We're just introducing them now in the webinar. You may not have heard them before. You've heard them, but you haven't heard me talk about them. So let's explain what relevance they have to inflammation. So remember we talked about the anti-inflammatory army and the inflammatory army? I'm assuming you're all nodding your heads. Right, good, yay. So we talked about how we make inflammatory compounds that, do things like surround the splinter wound and prevent a microbe from getting a hold, and how we have an anti-inflammatory argument that kind of cleans up the mess and lowers inflammation when things happen to create inflammation, and how these two things have to be in balance and how they have to, they have to be equally funded. Remember, I used the example of the Navy and the Army, and they both need the same amount of money so that we have these two functioning and synergistic groups. Okay, so our anti-inflammatory compounds come from a balance of omega-3s and 6s, such as the omega-3s are higher than the omega-6s. Or look, an easier way to think of it is the anti-inflammatory ones are made from omega-3s. The inflammatory ones are made from omega-6s. The balance between those two is an incredibly important metric for human health, because when that balance between omega-6s and omega-3s is not what it should be, we are set up for even more inflammation. So all of this junk vegetable oil, seed oils, they're actually not even vegetable oil, they're seed oils, but we call them vegetable oils, corn oil and safflower oil and sunflower oil and canola oil, and all of these are high in omega-6s. Omega-3s are fish oil, to some extent flaxseed oil, different kind of omega-3. That's pretty much it. So you need about a 1-to-1 balance to be healthy. Let's look at what we're doing now in our diet. And that's because you cannot eat a processed food without getting this junk in the ingredients. It's in everything. When the powers that be made the enormously brilliant decision to get rid of all of the saturated fats in our diet and replace lard and all of these other healthy cooking oils with vegetable oil, they did this. And that's what we eat now. And that's been shown in research. Anybody wants the reference on that, just email me or Cheryl or Jennifer, and we'll send it to you. But this has been researched in peer-reviewed after peer-reviewed article. There's an entire, I'd show it up to you if we had video. It's called the World Review of Nutrition and Dietetics, Volume 100. It's an entire book dealing with the balance between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, and it's all the research, all published in one place. And basically, we're eating about 16 times more omega-6s than omega-3s. So that is one of the biggest sources of inflammation in the diet. And again, let's follow the thread of the argument. We need to know what's causing inflammation. Why? Because inflammation is causing disease, and disease is causing everything that we don't want to happen, including premature aging and death. So the sources of the dietary balance between omega-6s and omega-3s is of enormous importance. This is actually a quote from that very book that I just mentioned. A high omega-6, omega-3 ratio, as found in today's Western diet, promotes the pathogenesis of many diseases, including heart disease, cancer, osteoporosis, and inflammatory autoimmune diseases. Okay, so another source of inflammation, trans fats. I think most of you have heard enough about trans fats to not really probably don't have to go on a tour of what they do and how horrible they are for you, but they're really bad. So we kind of have a sense of what the problem is. Inflammation, which basically promotes every major disease known under the sun. Where it comes from, toxic air, toxic water, medicines, drugs, pesticides, foreign objects in our food, chemicals, preservative, Roundup, you name it, all of that stuff, and particularly from the highly imbalanced ratio between junky vegetable omega-6 rich vegetable oils that are processed within an inch of their lives, and the balance between those and the omega-3 anti-inflammatory oils found in, for example, fish. Okay, so what do we do about this? Well, the first thing we do is we look for lots of foods that have anti-inflammatories in their makeup, which basically is anything that looks like real food, anything that spoils, anything on this left-hand side of the slide, putting out the fire. If it's green and it's red and it's orange and it's yellow and it's any of these foods here are loaded with natural anti-inflammatories. Exercise, and not just exercise, because exercise can actually cause some inflammation and oxidation itself, but deep breathing, relaxation, being in the sun, good living, walking in greenery, all of these things are very anti-inflammatory, and of course supplements are an enormous source of anti-inflammatories, and we'll talk about some of those in just a minute. So what are some of the foods? Onions. Highly anti-inflammatory. They contain one of the most powerful anti-inflammatories in the world, quercetin. So do apples, by the way. Garlic, leeks, all the usual suspects. Any kind of tea, red wine, cocoa flavonoids, flaxseed oil, beans, all the brassica vegetables. These are all just anti-inflammatory armies. My book, shameless plug for my book, The 150 Healthiest Foods on Earth. Virtually every food in here is in here because of the natural plant chemicals found in, or the high source of omega-3s or protein, but most of them are in here because they are just rich sources of natural anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. Salmon, a huge source of wild salmon of omega-3s, grass-fed beef, happy cows, loads of grass-fed of omega-3s. All of the things that give these fruits their colors, they're called anthocyanins, and they are anti-inflammatory as can be. One of the reasons cherries is such a great food for gout and other inflammatory conditions is because of the anthocyanidins. So there's lots of these plant compounds, the same ones that give the blueberries their blue and the cherries their red. These are very anti-inflammatory in your body. Then there's spices. My new book with Dr. Stephen Masley, which will be out in January, we talk so much about this. It's really the best kept secret in the nutritional arsenal, how important spices and flavorings are, not just for making food taste good and therefore for making you more likely to eat it, but also because these spices are just they're like factories for anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. And turmeric, one of my absolute favorite ones, it's good for the liver. It's an anti-inflammatory. It's an antioxidant. It's just, turmeric's a super spice. And by the way, hard to get enough of it from the spice alone, something you really do need to supplement with, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But the active ingredient in turmeric is something called curcuminoids, and those are the very powerful anti-inflammatory compounds that are found in not only turmeric, but a lot of other spices as well. Green tea, just loaded with plant chemicals called catechins and polyphenols. These are wonderfully anti-inflammatory. I mentioned before onions because of quercetin. They're also found in apples. So if you're eating foods with lots of colors that would spoil easily, you're probably eating a pretty anti-inflammatory diet. Papaya and mango and pineapple, these all have anti-inflammatory compounds in them. Seeds like flax seeds have a different omega-3 that's also good for you called alpha-linolenic acid. So now we get into supplements. For me, I think, I have a basic, like top 10 list of supplements, and I get asked a lot of times by magazines what are my favorite top 10, and they change from year to year, but basically there's been a few that have stayed on the list year in and year out, and two of them I want to talk about today in particular, omega-3s and curcumin. Curcumin being the active ingredient in the spice turmeric that we talked about before, and because it is such a powerful anti-inflammatory. And omega-3s are basically the building blocks for those anti-inflammatory armies we talked about. So where are they found? They're found primarily in cold water fish. Why do you want wild? Because it's the least contaminated, because it doesn't have, because it has real astaxanthin, which is a wonderful antioxidant that wild salmon get from eating krill. Farmed salmon get it from color wheels. Farmed salmon are a very big source of PCBs. I'm not saying if that's the only salmon you can get that it's a waste of time to eat farmed salmon. That's what you get in most restaurants in America. But if you have a choice, wild salmon is always better. And again, wonderful source of omega-3s. Here is, by the way, this slide I should have put in earlier, going back to that omega-3/6 balance and how important it is. Here is just the annual deaths from all causes in the United States due to dietary factors alone. And look at that. Low intakes of fruits and vegetables, high trans fats, low, that should be low, not KOW, but LOW, low EPA and DHA, those are the omega-3s found in fish. 84,000 annual deaths due to that dietary factor alone. That's amazing. Look how much could be corrected by fixing that one thing. And then again, there's curcumin. I put that up again because it is so important. It is literally the anti-inflammatory botanical. And here are some of those who are the nerd group like myself who is interested in all of these absolute, technical things about what it does and what it turns on and how it modulates different inflammatory pathways. There they are. Cheryl will send you the slide if you want it. But the thing to remember is that it's anti-inflammatory. That's the take-home point. You don't need to know proteolytic enzymes and what it does to kinases. It doesn't matter. It's an anti-inflammatory botanical. So is boswellia, another wonderful anti-inflammatory botanical. So again, going back to curcumin, with Alzheimer's, it may block the formation of beta amyloid, which is found in the brains of Alzheimer's patients, and with cancer, it may slow the spread of cancer or the growth of new tumor vessels. So again, let's go back to the summing this up. The number one take-home point is inflammation kills. It kills slowly, silently. But make no mistake, it's not cholesterol that's killing you. It's not cholesterol that's giving you a heart attack. It's inflammation that causes the problem in the first place and promotes the problem once it's there. Second take-home point, eat an anti-inflammatory diet. And by the way, an anti-inflammatory diet does not have to mean a high-carb diet. It doesn't even have to mean a low-carb diet. It means that you eat a lot of plant foods with a lot of anti-inflammatories. And people really, I'm on the low-carb end of the political spectrum in nutrition, and people think, well, you would just eat protein and fat. No, nobody ever said that. That's a straw man. That's not the argument of the low-carb people. Never has been. Atkins ate tons of vegetables, and God knows knows he's not the only proponent of that particular, there's a lot of different ways to do low carb. He's only one of them. He gets the lion's share of publicity as the boogeyman for like, oh, they just eat lots of bacon. But there's tons of vegetables on Atkins, and there can be tons of vegetables and anti-inflammatory, natural anti-inflammatories on a paleo diet, on a raw food diet, on a low-fat diet. I don't know why in the world anybody would still even try to be on a low-fat diet, but if you did, you could certainly still eat tons of these foods. So these foods are compatible with any eating plan on the planet, seriously. So you want to eat as many anti-inflammatory foods as possible. And the take-home point number 3 is supplements can really help in the battle against inflammation, particularly omega-3s, particularly things like curcumin. And that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to move over to questions now, and I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Johnny. That was just wonderful. I learned something new every single time I heard you lecture. Well, you said you were going to keep it short and sweet so that people could get on with their busy lives and learn what they needed to learn. So I see that we already have some questions on board here.
Okay.
One is, I recently was told that hyaluronic acid is good for inflammation related to arthritis, and wonder if this is something you know anything about.
I know a little about it. It's not my definite field of expertise. I know that hyaluronic acid is a component of healthy skin, that they use it a lot in skin formulas. They inject it a lot. It definitely has some anti-inflammatory capacity. I don't know that it's the #1 treatment or the first order of treatment for arthritis. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the integrative docs or the integrative health practitioners who call on different traditions and use, different techniques from different sources weren't using it more for arthritis. It's not really my specialty. I do know that it is somewhat anti-inflammatory and that it does help build, collagen in skin. But beyond that, I don't know whether I can't say much more than that.
I heard it's really good cosmetically applied to the skin. And I do know physicians who do intra-articular injections of hyaluronic acid, but I have heard, and again, I'm not an expert either, but I have heard that it's not something you can take orally because when you try to take it orally, it is destroyed in such a way that it's not really useful, the same way that hyaluronic acid made within your own body is.
Yeah, I'm not expert enough to comment on that, but that is also something that I've heard, although there are formulas in which hyaluronic acid is a component that are given orally. I don't know that I don't know whether that's just synergistic with the other nutrients, whether it's put in there because people know about it and it doesn't really do much good because, as you say, it may not even survive the gut. Don't know. That's a little beyond my expertise. I could certainly find out, but
all right, folks, so take everything we've both said with some level of that it is speculation. All right, next question. We could do an entire hour on this next question. What is being done to get MDs and cardiologists to become more educated and concerned about inflammation and things like high CRP?
Yeah, you're right. If we dug down into that one and into doctor education in general, it could certainly take us more than an hour. I think they're becoming more aware of it than you might think. Because we're still writing follow-up editorials and things about the great cholesterol myth. As recently as a couple of months ago, it was still #1 on the Amazon heart disease list, and so we still get requests to write editorials. We just submitted, Steve Sinatra, Drew Sinatra, his naturopath son, and myself just submitted an article on the recommendation of the American Diabetes Association to put every diabetic on a statin drug. So we're still talking about this. And whenever I go through the literature looking for citations and things to bolster, what I'm talking about when it comes to cholesterol and heart disease and stuff, I see so much research in which inflammatory markers are used. They talk about it in so much medical research that I have to believe that even though it hasn't broken through yet to the public and you don't go to your doctor and your doctor says, hey, we got to do something about your inflammation. No, they say you got to do something about your cholesterol. So, this person asking the question probably has experienced that and is wondering, like, why are we still talking about things like cholesterol when we should be talking about inflammation, and wondering, like, what's it going to take to reach a tipping point where doctors start really focusing on that. And I don't know when that tipping point will be reached, but I do know that this is no longer something that's swept in the closet. I mean, just about many research studies that I read, even in the abstracts, they will sum up the measures that they use. And they'll look at inflammatory markers. You still get a lot of conventional doctors who will tell you that, well, the CRP test, yeah, it doesn't really show anything, doesn't really prevent any deaths. It's a very old-fashioned way of looking at this. It's a very lab measurement way of looking at things. And I don't know how long that will change, but I do think that people are beginning to understand how important inflammation is. I also, here's a prediction, no science to back this up. This is just as a very involved and astute observer of the whole pharmaceutical and medical educational, scenes. I think statin drugs are definitely starting to take a hit. There's no doubt in my mind that the whole cholesterol hypothesis, it's not crumbling yet, but, we speak at a lot of places where doctors come up to us and say, thank God somebody's finally talking about this. So I think there is a tipping point being reached where people realize that lowering cholesterol isn't going to do anything for lowering heart disease.
Well, it's about time it's about time, and thank you for your role, Jonny, in helping to push that forward, because when I think of the lives lost and the lives damaged on the false hope that somehow they're protected if they take a statin drug, it's heartbreaking.
Let me just, not to get too tangential on the whole statin thing is, but the fact is, and I was just reading this when we were doing the research for the last, rebuttal article to the American Diabetes, statins really do a lot of good things. I hate to be the one to say that because I've been so, accused of being anti-statin, and what I really am is anti-statin over prescription. But they really do a number of things, and here's what I was getting at when I said that the cholesterol hypothesis is taking a drubbing, is beginning to take a drubbing. If you notice, if you put your ear to the ground and you're a good listener to the kind of rumblings that you can sense before they become really public and big campaigns, they are sitting in their boardrooms going, okay, guys, we got this $30 billion drug, and people are starting to realize that lowering cholesterol doesn't do diddly. What? Let's sell this as an anti-inflammatory. So there is already some rumblings to make inflammation a medical condition. And I will predict, again, I have no evidence for this, it's just my sense, 25 years in the industry, watching how these little promotional things start and how they start to feed press releases and how they start to drum up. They're already talking about how statins do something. Well, all right, maybe the lowering cholesterol doesn't matter, but they lower inflammation. So I think that as the drug companies start to cling to some way to save this cash cow of a drug, you're going to hear more and more about the fact that they are mild. Statin drugs are anti-inflammatory. The irony is of using a statin drug to lower inflammation as your first order of business is idiotic for two reasons. One is the side effects don't support the use of this drug for anti-inflammation when you can do it better with fish oil with no side effects. So why would you turn to something that has even a 20% chance of muscle pain, libido loss, memory loss, and all the other things that go with it? Why turn to something like that when you can do the same thing with fish oil and curcumin? That's question number one. It's a very inefficient thing as a first order of business for inflammation. So I think that inflammation is going to get more and more attention. It's already starting to happen. I suspect they will try to hang that that benefit of onto statin drugs to keep them alive a little bit longer. But the fact is, they are mildly anti-inflammatory, and for middle-aged men with previous heart attacks who are eating horrible diets and not doing much else to lower inflammation, it might be the only thing they have. So, we don't think that there's never a place for statin drugs. We just think they're giving them out for candy and as candy. And in fact, you could accomplish what they accomplish a lot better with natural substances.
Oh, well said. The next is right up your alley. As a person with a PhD in nutrition, does decaf green tea have as much anti-inflammatory and health properties as regular green tea?
Well, you know what, we've talked about that. I've talked about that with a lot of people, including tea producers at Expo West, who are, really into this. And I honestly don't think anybody knows the answer to that. I don't know that it's ever been really, really studied. Here's my feeling about, I am not anti-caffeine. I never have been anti-caffeine. I think the whole brouhaha about how, oh, I'm getting healthy, I'm going to eat soy, and I'm never going to drink coffee, I think is, that's why they call me the nutrition mythbuster, because I think that's as bogus as thinking that heart disease is caused by cholesterol. So, when our side makes mistakes, I like to call BS on our side as much as I do on the, establishment. And I think that, this inherent fear we have of caffeine as this horrible substance is just unfounded. Now, that said, so I don't even understand why people drink decaf green tea in the first place, but I understand that there is a percentage of the population who is made very jittery by caffeine, and for whatever reasons, or spiritual reasons, whatever reasons, they don't want any stimulation, artificial stimulation, even if it comes from a natural source like that. I understand why some people would want to avoid it, but I think that it's probably a much smaller portion of the universe than we think that has to really avoid caffeine. So for those people, I don't really see the problem. Not only that, with green tea, you have a particular chemical called L-theanine, especially in green tea, which is given as a drug for anxiety in Japan. It's one of the calmingest amino acids in the world, and that's why people who drink green tea don't get the jitters. You don't see these people in China and Japan running around like A-type personalities. No, they're going to, while they're down in their green tea, they just don't. 16 cups of coffee a day is one thing. A few, 3-4 cups of green tea with the caffeine, it just doesn't produce the same results. So now, going back to your question, which are they identical in terms of catechins and in terms of the polyphenols, all the other things that are found in there? My guess is that they probably are. I don't know how much of those would be removed by the decaffeinating process, but remember, it doesn't just wind up being decaffeinated. That's a whole chemical process, and who knows what that does to delicate compounds in the tea plant and in the cocoa bean. So I don't know. So the correct answer is I do not know. I suspect they are similar, and I also would question why the need for drinking the decaf version in the first place, or at least subject that to a little bit of scrutiny. If you in fact are one of those people whose blood pressure rises, gets very nervous, can't sleep, da-da-da-da-da, yeah, you should definitely be on decaf. But a lot of people do it reflexively just because they think caffeine's got to be bad for me, so I'm going to do decaf all the time. And if you're in that category, rethink it a little bit.
Excellent. Here's a person who's wondering if cooking fish changes the molecular structure and affects the absorption of the omega-3s found in the fish. So is it better, would you say raw fish or supplementing is the best way to get omega-3s in your diet versus eating
You know what?
fish?
That's a very intelligent. Does it change the molecular structure? That is a level of food chemistry and biochemistry that is beyond my expertise. I do not know the answer to that. I know that my co-author on the new book is Dr. Stephen Masley, who is, in addition to being a fellow of the American Heart Association, he also is a trained chef and spent a year at the Four Seasons learning this stuff. And he's a big cooker of fish, and I think he probably would have said something about it being, all these studies that show that people who eat fish, most of them are not eating raw fish. So we have to assume that they're getting their omega-3s from the cooked fish, and that if it is changed, it's not changed significantly enough to make a difference from a health point of view. So I just do not know the answer to that, but I suspect it doesn't change the molecular structure of the omega-3s in any way that would make a difference.
All right. Here's a question about carbs. What would you say is low carb? What amount of carbs does the average American consume daily or yearly, and what's a good number to remain under to be low carb in your opinion?
Could you repeat that again?
All right. Well, they want to know what's the threshold for good intake of carbs versus bad intake of carbs. So what's the average American consuming, but what's the number they should realistically shoot for health purposes?
Okay, I'm going to respectfully suggest that we reformulate that question. This has been a subject of mine for 25 years in talking to audiences about if you ask the question in the wrong way, you're not going to get the information you need. The answer is not the number to shoot for. It is the quality of the food you're eating. So there are diets. I could construct a high carbohydrate diet which you're eating 150 to 200 grams of carbs a day, and it is a spectacularly healthy diet. And I could construct one in which you're eating 75 grams of carbs, and it's not so healthy. So the number isn't really the point. The point is, where are those carbs coming from? If they are coming exclusively from green vegetables, from leafy vegetables, from the brassica family of vegetables, Brussels sprouts and broccoli and spinach and kale and cauliflower, and they're coming from beans, and they're coming from, and you haven't touched a cereal grain or a slice of bread, and it's all coming from that, I don't care how many grams of carbs you eat. If they're coming from Special K and cornflakes and bread and pasta and ronzoni, I care very much how many grams you eat. So, the question needs to be a little bit reframed. Now, if we're talking about for general health, I think the better way to look at it, rather than counting grams, is just don't eat any starches. Just don't eat stuff made with flour, and you don't have to worry about the number. If we're talking about a very specific subcategory of low-carb diets called ketogenic diets, in which your body is in nutritional ketosis, and this is a huge subject. I just attended an entire weekend conference on this at the University of Tampa. Much research going on about ketogenic diets for athletes, not only for weight loss, but for people who are doing world-class events, 6-day runs, marathons, special forces, people who are training on ketogenic diets like that. Then you really do need to keep the number of carbs very, very low to stay in nutritional ketosis, probably well under 50 grams a day. But that's specifically if you want to be in nutritional ketosis. If you're simply talking about for general good health, there's really not a number to go for. The average American consumes over 300 grams of carbs, most of which come from absolute junk carbs. Pasta, bread, cereal, potatoes, rice, junk carbs. So if you were eating the same, Gary Taubes has a very interesting point about this, because they say to him sometimes, well, if it's all the carbs, how come people lose weight on low-calorie diets, Gary? How do you explain that? And he has a great explanation. If you're eating 3,500 calories a day, and 50% of them are from carbs, you're eating 1,750 calories a day from carbohydrates. If you now make this a low-calorie diet, you go to 2,000 calories a day, and you're still eating 50% from carbohydrates. Now you're only eating 1,000 grams of carbohydrates. So you have already reduced your carbohydrates just by reducing the number of calories. So, it's the average American eats 300 or more grams of junky carbohydrates a day. I would say, if you could get yours down to 100 or so, and if you could get them all from vegetables, fruits, and beans and things like that, I don't think the number makes much difference. If you can't quite do that, if you can get it under 100, you'd be doing a really good thing.
Excellent. Here's a person, and this may not be something that we can resolve over a webinar, but her sister has chronic diarrhea, and she's wondering if inflammation could be the cause.
You know what, that's almost, it's right on the borderline of a medical question, because there tends to be so many factors here that are individual that I'm just not comfortable commenting. Could it be? Yes. It could be a contributing factor, but there's no way to know without really doing, a patient evaluation.
Here's one that says, does ginger have anti-inflammatory properties?
Yes. That's an easy one.
That's an easy
After
one.
all these hard ones. Yeah, that's an easy one. You bet it does.
Yeah. Here's a person who says that they've read all of the amazing science on curcumin, but when she takes curcumin, it causes digestive upset. What should she do?
I would first ask whether when people say when she takes curcumin, is she taking the turmeric? Is she eating the spice? How much is she eating? Is she eating a supplement? If so, what quality, what type, what brand? These are all things that can make and again, she may have an idiopathic reaction. There are some people, you can tell them from now to doomsday, a great diet with lots of kale and asparagus, and they're going to have some weird allergic reaction to asparagus. There are people like that. So she may have some very idiosyncratic reaction to this particular spice. Every single drug in the PDR, by the way, every single one, the thousands of pages that are listed in the PDR, it'll say, one of the side effects will be anyone who happens to be allergic to some ingredient in that particular drug. And the same thing is true with spices. It's unlikely, it's unusual, but it happens. And what I would say is, if you're talking about getting it from a supplement, the first thing to do is change brands and go with something that has BCM 95 curcumin, for example, which is usually very reliable and very well studied. And if it still happens with a reliable brand, freshly made, then I don't know. Then you have to start looking for possibly allergenic reactions.
All right. Here's a question about cooking oils. What oil do you prefer? This person uses olive oil for cooking. Are there others besides olive oil that are healthy?
Yeah, there are tons of healthy oils. And by the way, it's so funny because we devoted an entire chapter to our book about this. And what's interesting with the oils is that, and this is probably will take us way past the time that we have and is way more involved, but it's not just the oil, it's the temperature you use it at. And I have been guilty of this in making some mistakes, and I'll give you an example. Coconut oil. I'm a huge fan of coconut oil. I absolutely love coconut oil. I think it's fantastic. It stands up to heat, blah, 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 blah. You get the extra unrefined kind, da, 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 da. Well, guess what? If you get that extra unrefined virgin coconut oil that's so good for your brain and for your skin and all that, you can't cook at a real high heat with that. You've got to use the refined version to get up to 400 and higher in heat. Same thing with palm oil. I love Malaysian palm oil, that red, thick oil. It's loaded with carotenoids and tocotrienols. And, hey, over 300 degrees, they're going to get destroyed. You got to use the refined kind. So it's very interesting about smoke points. I would definitely suggest investigating smoke points for oils. And when you even with olive oil, the extra virgin olive oil, you should never do anything but drizzle with that. Never cook with extra virgin olive oil. You can use virgin olive oil at lower temperature, at moderate temperatures, but actually the only olive oil that will stand up to heat and not really decompose or create bad stuff is the refined kind, which you don't really want. But if you have to use it for cooking, the extra virgin will be destroyed at high heats, at any kind of heat. You're paying all that money so that these delicate polyphenols are barely touched. They're barely even, no chemical touches them, no heat touches them, and then you're going to put them in a pot, at 400 degrees? It's crazy. So you have to look also at the smoke points of oils, and it's relatively easy to find online. We wrote an entire chapter on it in our new book, and if I had known this was going to come up, I would have opened up that chapter and read to you some of them. But that's the thing that you really want to look for.
All right. This is a pretty simple one, too. Do you think asparagus is good for cancer prevention?
I think all vegetables have anti-cancer. Oh, you know what? I just pulled up the oil. Let's go back to the oil for a second. I just pulled that one up fresh off the press. So for cooking, for high heat, again, if you're talking about, I guess it depends on what heat you're going to use. But if we're talking about really high heat, 450 to 650, that's a lot of heat. You want to stick with things like the lightest olive oil, not the virgin olive oil, clarified butter, which is ghee, G-H-E-E, pecan oil, avocado oil. Those stand up to heat brilliantly. When you're talking medium-high heat, 375 to 449, now you can use virgin olive oil, almond oil, hazelnut oil, refined walnut oil, refined coconut oil. Now, if you get to medium heat, 324, it starts to open up a little bit. Now you can use regular coconut oil and butter and extra virgin olive oil. Low heat, you can use pistachio oil. That's good up to 225 or so. So again, it really depends on the temperature that you're going to use it for.
Excellent. I never knew any of that. Here I said earlier that I always learn something new from your presentations. Now I'm learning something new from your Q&A session as well.
Thank you.
Because I'll tell you, I'm guilty of that whole extra virgin high-quality olive oil and cooking with it. Yeah.
So have I been.
I'm going to rethink that. And the same with coconut oil. I buy the really good coconut oil.
Some of these oils, walnut oil, pistachio oil, pecan oil, palm oil, olive oil, macadamia nut oil, hazelnut oil, they all have their uses. And if you get, good organic sources of them, they're fine. But you can't use them at heats that are too high for what they've been designed for.
We have time for one more question, and this is a technical one, but I think it's something that a lot of our listeners may have been hearing about. Well, if you don't know the answer, that's fine, but I think you may have an opinion. They've been hearing a lot about these blood tests for cholesterol that aren't just looking at HDL, LDL, triglycerides. They're starting to look at the particle type. And what's your opinion of that? Are they more useful in predicting cardiac risk?
They're the only ones that are useful.
Okay.
Let me repeat that. They are the only ones that are useful. The others are past their expiration. The others are a waste of time. Let me explain. So here's the very fast summary of this. And yes, this is something I know quite a bit about because we wrote a lot about this in our book, The Great. And if anybody wants to, a shameless plug, the book's very inexpensive. You can get it on Kindle or paperback, The Great Cholesterol Myth. We'll explain this in depth, but here's the short version of it. Up to 1960, you go to a health fair. There's a woman sitting in the booth, and they take a little prick of your blood from your finger, and they go, "Oh, Mrs. Jones, your cholesterol is 190. Oh, Mrs. Jones, your cholesterol is 230. Mr. Smith, it's 240. They had one number for cholesterol. They looked at total cholesterol. In the early 60s, scientists began to pay attention to the fact, which had been known for a while, but they started to pay attention to the fact that actually cholesterol really moves through the body in a couple of different packages. It doesn't just flow through the bloodstream. It's always in a little package. And the package is called a lipoprotein. And there's two flavors of lipoprotein. There's HDL, high-density lipoprotein, and LDL, low-density lipoprotein. So there's, actually these two packages are a little bit different. One of them seems to deliver cholesterol to certain organs. The other one seems to pick it up. And the HDL is kind of a good cholesterol, and the LDL is kind of a bad cholesterol. So they started to name these two classes of lipoproteins in terms of good cholesterol and bad. Now, that was an improvement over total, because now we knew that all cholesterol is not this. Actually, all cholesterol is the same, but it moves in two distinct packages throughout the body, and that they seem to have different functions. So that's an improvement. We're getting a little bit more precise now in our measurements, and then they started talking about, the ratio of total to HDL and things like this, and they used these measures of prediction. This was a big improvement over 1960. Problem is, this is 15 years past its expiration date. We now know that it's not just two little packages. It's about 5 HDLs and 5 LDLs. There's LDL-A, which if you look at under a microscope, looks like a cotton ball. How much damage do you do if I throw a cotton ball at you? Exactly. So LDL-A is pretty innocuous. LDL-B looks like a little BB gun. It's atherogenic. It's oxidized. It's inflamed. It does damage. LDL-A and LDL-B are not the same, even though they are both technically LDL. HDL comes in HDL2, HDL2A, HDL3. Most HDL is pretty good, but there's a couple of HDLs that are very inflammatory. So the new test, which isn't even new, it's 10 or 15 years old, is what's called the particle test. And that looks under the hood and sees, okay, I don't care that your total cholesterol went up. What's happening let's dig down and see what's really going on under the hood. How much LDL-A do you have? How much LDL-B do you have? One of the most maddening, pull your hair out of your head things for us about saturated fat and cholesterol is, yes, saturated fat raises total cholesterol, even raises total LDL cholesterol. And if you're one of these doctors who hasn't opened a book in the last 15 years, you think, oh, his LDL went up, let's put him on a statin. But what it really does when you look under the hood is it's raising your LDL cotton balls, the LDL-A, and it's lowering your LDL-B. And if all you look at is LDL, yep, out comes the statin, the prescription pad with the statin. But if you're looking at the particle test, you're going, wait a minute, this guy's cholesterol went up, but his risk for heart disease just went way down because his LDL-B just dropped to the floor, his LDL-A went up, and meanwhile his HDL went up even higher. So yes, the particle tests are the ones to get. And God bless you, Dr. Oz, because one of the things he said when we were on his show is if you go to your doctor and based on the old-fashioned cholesterol test, he wants to put you on a statin, at the very least, push back and ask for the particle test.
Because if you go on a statin drug, you might be because if you go on a statin drug, you might be reducing the very protective cholesterol that you have in your body.
Or you might not even need the statin. Or maybe you will, but at least get the information that's from 2015, not from 1955.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. That's a great note to end on.
Okay, good.
full of passion and magnificent information. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowden. I so appreciate it every time that you join us. I hope that you'll come back again really soon.
Anytime. You know, I would love to. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks, everybody, for spending this time with us. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And, folks, for more information, you can visit us at Terry Talks Nutrition, where you'll find all kinds of access to free written articles, podcasts, recordings of radio shows, and past webinars. You can also sign up for a free weekly newsletter. We do not share email addresses with anyone, and so we treat your trust very carefully. So if you would like a newsletter from us, you won't be suddenly getting a barrage of ads. You can also follow Terry Lemerond on Twitter at twitter.com/Terry Lemerond for your daily dose of inspiration and natural health. And we'd be honored if you find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Terry Talks Nutrition. So thank you, all of us, for joining us today. I hope that this has been a useful and informative health-based webinar. And until we meet again, good health to you. Bye-bye.